Debate over the divorce bill continues to swirl online and in the halls of Senate, where at least 5 lawmakers remain staunchly opposed to it. To recap, the 5 who are against are supposedly Senate President Cheese Escudero and Senators Francis Tolentino, Joel Villanueva, Bato de la Rosa, and Jinggoy Estrada. They cite a number of reasons, from religion to conservativeness and a preference for annulment. To weigh in on the matter now, we have with us on the show live attorney Virginia Viray. She's a senior lecturer at the UP College of Law and also a member of UP Law's Gender Law and Policy Program. Attorney Viray, good evening. Thanks so much for joining us, and I apologize for getting to you late. It was a bit heavy, very heavy first block for us.
No worries. Good evening, everyone.
Okay, so let's tackle some of these arguments that the lawmakers are throwing at us one by one. The very first one has to do with divorce law not being needed, considering that we already have annulment. That's an argument that Senate President Cheese Escudero has made. He says we should just make more affordable annulment. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, first off, I disagree with a good senator. I think that misses the point about the core issue about annulment. He said that we should just make it affordable, but it doesn't address the fact that the problem with annulment is that the offended spouse will have to prove that the offending spouse, the psychological incapacity of the offending spouse, was already existent at the time of the celebration of marriage. And that is very difficult to prove. This annulment, we often refer to it as annulment. It's actually the declaration of nullity of marriage under Article 36 of the Family Code. And the reason for the ground for annulment is the psychological incapacity of the offending spouse. It's very difficult to prove that it is already in existence at the time of the celebration of marriage. And that is actually what is making the process very expensive. Okay, that's very expensive. So it's very elitist also. And that is what the divorce bill that was recently passed in the lower house was trying to address. And hopefully, if it gets passed also by the Senate, it becomes law that addresses the issue, the very core issue.
Right.
Because in the divorce bill, the psychological incapacity no longer needs to be at the point of the celebration of marriage.
When you say it's very expensive, can you give us more context on that? How much typically does annulment cost, and how tedious is the process?
Prior to a recent case, it was mandatory. That's the party trying to prove psychological incapacity had to hire a psychologist or a psychiatrist to prove the psychological incapacity. Of course, recently, it's no longer mandatory, but you still have to prove it one way or the other. It is typical for a case to last for several years. So imagine the legal cost. Typically, that would be at least 300,000 minimum for you to get an annulment.
Right.
So we call the annulment declaration of nullity of marriage.
I have some friends who spent like 400 something. That seems to be the average amongst those whom I know who have been able to pay. So it is quite steep. Let's move on over, Attorney Viray, to the other argument, this time coming from our former Senate President, Mig Zubiri. He says he is not in favor of divorce because he is pro-family and pro-life. The worry is, will this actually open the floodgates to U.S.-style divorce and Las Vegas-style weddings? And then so far, he was saying that along those lines, this would lead to dysfunctional families. Now, the other argument to that is that, this actually happens all the time anyway. Why don't we just... And even if you make... the option available, people don't actually have to take it if they are pro-family.
Yes, you raised very good points, actually. First, let's go to the Las Vegas-style divorce. If we look at the House Bill 9349, which was passed by the lower house, it only provides for very serious grounds for the divorce. No? In fact, those are the same grounds for legal separation, except that it actually allows the offended spouse to move on, right? Not be bound to the offending spouse even after even after the separation. So you can actually sever the ties there. Also, psychological incapacity is also one of the grounds, except that you no longer have to prove that it was inexistent at the time of marriage. It can also occur after marriage, which means that the abuse that is being experienced by the abused spouse can be the evidence in itself of the psychological incapacity. So those are very serious grounds. There is no fault divorce in the proposed bill.
Attorney,
So that's go ahead.
Attorney,
So,
Is it possible to divorce the state from the church? For example, legalize divorce for the state. For those who get civil marriages, don't legalize it for those who have church weddings. Is it possible to make that separation? Because it is, I mean, marriage is very, the sanctity of marriage must be honored according to religion. But how about those who have a different belief?
yes. Well, we all have enjoyed the free exercise of religion and worship, and that is worthy of respect. One thing to note, even in the case of declaration of nullity of marriage under Article 36, for instance, even if you get annulled, that is a civil annulment, and the church does not recognize that. So there is really no reason to conflate the civil aspect of the divorce and annulment as to the civil aspect and also the religious aspect. Those who are opposed to divorce, as you've noted, are not actually, they won't be forced to divorce. They can certainly stay married, even in the civil aspect of marriage.
Is there a way?
So, is it possible to divorce? Yes, because those are two separate things.
What about
The civil
legal
aspect and the religious.
legal
Yes.
separation, attorney? How does that figure in? A lot of people are also pointing out that this already exists for civil weddings. Some people apparently like to just limit it to a civil wedding so that they can avail the legal separation, which is the only kind of available move if you are here in the Philippines and you got married here. Is that not enough, or is this divorce? So how is it different from the actual legal separation that has been going on here and it is acceptable here for a while now?
I think, yes, thank you. I think what we must clarify here is that legal separation doesn't actually dissolve the marriage. You still remain married. There are just certain effects of legal separation. Like, for example, the properties of the spouses are already settled and divided. But for all intents and purposes, they are still married. The marriage bond is still there. Okay, and I think that is what I guess conservatives are after. But if you think about it, it's very cruel, right? So after an abused spouse has already been abused, she has to remain bound and married to her abuser, right? And for what? Just so that we can say that the marriage bond wasn't broken, when for all intents and purposes, the marriage is broken. They are separate. They're separated now.
So, attorney,
Also, in the case of legal separation, even the abused spouse is not allowed to remarry and to move on with her life, even after having spent her life with an unworthy spouse and an abusive spouse. After they've legally separated, she can't even remarry and move on with a new and better life with a
Right.
better partner.
Attorney, there's a proposal to make annulment cheaper, right, as mentioned a while ago. How about increasing the grounds for annulment? I mean, is that possible, or is that the main difference between annulment and a divorce?
I suppose the essence of the annulment is that, or the declaration of nullity is that it is void from the very beginning, right? And if you increase the grounds, like in this case, in the case of the divorce bill, it actually increases the grounds such that the psychological incapacity may be only existed after marriage. But it's not, in which case it doesn't make the marriage void, right? It recognizes that the marriage was valid. So it's not really nullity, right? The marriage was valid, except that, well, there was psychological incapacity after the marriage, and therefore you can get divorced. In that sense, it's really very different, right? It recognizes that the marriage was valid, so it's not annulment or declaration of nullity.
Right. So it does
But
have.
it's really severing the ties of marriage after a valid marriage.
So it does have very clear legal implications. We're going to have to leave that there for tonight, but thank you so much for your insights tonight. Attorney Virginia Viray, she's a senior lecturer at the UP College of Law.